We're going to take a look now at Part 2, which is the vocabulary smart sheets that are in the Make Sense Strategies toolkit. And there are several things to keep in mind when it comes to teaching vocabulary. One of those is that very often some assignments will require students to do things like look up the definition of a term, copy the definition, and then write a sentence using the term. Turns out that that's a very ineffective way of teaching vocabulary. Students rarely remember the new terms when we do that, although that's a very common type of assignment. Part of the problem is that students have figured out that you can copy a definition and never really read the definition or think about what it means. And often the definitions that come from dictionaries are not in student-friendly language, and they also typically contain a lot of terms that also need defining. And so basically copying the definition, and then what happens is students try to rote memorize the definition when they don't really even understand the definition. And so that almost always results in only temporary memory of the term and very little in terms of lasting effects. So the basic issue is that we need to look at what are other ways of teaching vocabulary besides having students copy definitions and memorize them. And so when we look at definitions themselves, it's important to understand that any given definition will typically have a set of distinctive features. Definitions also basically have components, and so there might be two key parts to a definition. And so part of what's very helpful with students is helping them recognize the different elements in the definition, and like part 1, part 2, and part 3. So kind of dissecting a definition to help them identify what are the distinctive features can be a really good practice. Likewise, it's very important that the definitions that students are actually learning are in student-friendly language. What we need to avoid is having students try to learn definitions that contain terms that also need defining. Some key things that really has to happen if students are going to remember two new terms, and the most important is they have to elaborate the new term in some way. Now, elaborate are things like using the term in their own language, in their own words, in applied context, and that has to be done multiple times, like around 15 different times if that term's going to stick. And so key thing is in your own words in applied contexts. Another is that students have to take these new terms and connect them to real life experiences in some way. Likewise, elaborations that involve visualizing or drawing or illustrating what the term means also really help students remember the meanings of new terms. And also what's really critical is they make personal knowledge connections. They identify, well, this term is like something else I already know, or what it reminds them of, or things of that nature. And so in these vocabulary smart sheets that you'll be seeing, you'll see a lot of prompts in them that are embedded on the visuals that are designed to cue the students to think about the vocabulary terms on different levels and in different ways in order to promote that elaboration. So in the reading standards, what we're talking about here is addressing determined word meanings and the impact of choice. And so primarily with the smart visuals here, we're going to be focusing on teaching vocabulary. And so these are the standards that we'll be addressing. Now, most of these standards are really dealing with context analysis, and that basically means being able to figure out a word you don't know when you come to it in a passage. We're going to be focusing more on teaching the meaning of specific words, which is also an important component of developing vocabulary. So on the home page of the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit, there's a whole section devoted to vocabulary. And so each of these sections provide links to specific smart sheets that do different things for teaching vocabulary. So for an example, I'm going to click on word castles, and when you click on that, this page will open up, and so you can see there's a couple of different types here. And so we're going to take a look at a couple of these, and we'll start with a very simple one. Now with this one, you basically have the term, what's the definition, draw a picture that illustrates that term, and make a knowledge connection. So that illustrates what I mean by having these prompts embedded onto the visual that cues the student to think about that vocabulary term in different ways. Now remember, make sure that the definition is not simply copied from the dictionary, and that the definition needs to be in student-friendly language, and that the definition does not contain other words that also need defining. Otherwise, the definition won't work. So here's an example. Let's say you're reading Across Five Apples, and you're using the vocabulary for that. And so some of those might be aloof. And so definition is unfriendly, not very social, not connecting well with others. So you'll notice that definition, if you look up definition of aloof in the dictionary, the definition is probably going to be a little more technical than this. And so you have to kind of convert that more technical definition into something that's more student-friendly. Also notice that this definition, in most cases, is not going to contain words that students don't know the meaning of already. In this case, instead of drawing a picture, the student imported a picture that he thought or she thought illustrated the concept of aloof. So you can import pictures into these, and sometimes a great activity is to go find pictures that tie in with the definitions and things of that nature. Personally, I like it when students draw definitions rather than import the pictures, because you have to think more about what you're going to illustrate to make sure that it reflects the definition. But importing pictures is the second best thing. Knowledge connection. I feel aloof in large groups of people that I don't know. So aloof might be one of the terms from Across Five Apples. Eminence, melancholy, and paralysis, just to illustrate how that might be used for that book. Another one that might be of interest to you are called word castles. Now, word castles have some similarities to the word walls. You have a new word. What's the definition? Draw or import a picture. What's a knowledge connection? But in addition to that, we have synonym, which obviously is what's another word that means the same thing, and an anonym, which is a word that obviously is the opposite, and if there is one, a homonym, and then write a sentence using the term. So we are having students construct sentences using the term, but notice that this is different from a knowledge connection. A knowledge connection it's not necessarily a sentence, it's just having them think about what this new term reminds them of or relates to, whereas a sentence is a sentence. So here's an example of that. Let's say we're doing the Mask of Red Death, and the term is pestilence, and the definition might be serious contagious disease. And a synonym for pestilence is plague. An antonym would be healthy. Homonym is pest. And knowledge connection, the Chinese flu everybody was so worried about. And the sentence is the pestilence wiped out almost everybody or everyone who lived in town. And then a picture. Now, when I'm looking at this example, it looks pretty good, but I would be a little bit concerned about this word contagious. And if students knew what contagious meant, then there's no problem in using contagious in the definition. But if you're not sure if they understand what contagious means, then you don't want to teach what pestilence means, because that's basically saying fubwit means the same as wubfambif. In other words, if you don't know this one, you're not going to know this one. So this is fine if students know what contagious means. Otherwise, we need to figure out a different definition that means the same thing but doesn't contain words that students won't be familiar. So in Mask of Red Death, what I might use is one of these. So you have pestilence, and then the dissolution, contagion, and countenances. We're going to take a look at semantic tables for a second. So if you click on that, it will open this page. And there are a number of these that are really designed for younger students, and then as you move through them, they get increasingly more complex and sophisticated. And so since we're talking about grades 6 through 8, we'll just take a look at the semantic web. And so basically the way this works is you have a term, and then these are words related to that term, and then these are words related to that word. And so let's say the book is Little Women, and so these are key terms that we're addressing from Little Women. And earlier I talked about how a definition will have different components to it. And so rather than writing out the definition, these are key words from the definition, or words that basically mean the same thing or synonyms. This is called word callouts. And so if we're doing Huck Finn, one of the words might be haggle, and the definition is bargaining about a price. And then what we're going to do is identify words that are related to haggle, like argue, compromise, and negotiate. Now they don't mean the same thing, they're just related to it. And so what we'll do with each of the main vocabulary terms is basically define them and then identify a series of words that are related to it. Another one is the semantic table 1. And the way this works is you have a term, and then this term is a member of this bigger thing. So it's either a member of this group or it's a type or a part of this bigger things. And then this part are key elements to the definition, key things to remember about the term. And this is why that term is important, and then draw a picture, and is like. So is like would be like, what's a simile for this term? So let's say we're doing the Call of the Wild, and the topic is imperious. And so it's a member of this group, adjectives used to describe personalities of people. And key elements of the definition, it's somebody who gives orders, acts superior or authoritative, views others as unimportant, and disdainful, prideful, haughty, lordy, and overbearing. Now, let's just take a look at this for a second. If students know what authoritative means, we're in good shape. Otherwise, we'd have to watch out for words like that and try not to use them, because remember, definitions should not contain words students don't know. All right, why is it important? Well, we all need people who share their knowledge and can act as leaders. We just need them to do it in a nice way. Draw a picture. That does look like an imperious kind of guy. And is like stuck-up kids who think they're better than everybody. Another area of the vocabulary smart sheets are word comparisons. And so there are a variety of those that you can select from. I like words linked in context, and so we'll take a look at that one. And so the way this is set up is all of these terms are related to this topic or context. And so you have your list of terms, and then this term is linked to this term because. So what's the connection between the two terms? And so let's say we're doing Treasure Island, and mutineer, which is where you overthrow the captain, is linked to this term, buccaneer. We're a pirate and they steal stuff at sea, because the buccaneers turned into mutineers. And so another one is coxswain, the person that steers the boat. The helm is the boat's steering wheel, so the coxswain uses a helm to steer the ship, and so forth. So this is a little bit different from look up the definition, but rather how the two words connected in some way. Word connections, speaking of which, here's one here where you have a term. What's the definition? What's it reminds me of this word because. And so let's say we're doing the contender, and you have a word like bunions, and it's places on your foot, and it's a swelling, and it's a thickening of the skin, and it's painful. So bunions reminds me of blisters, because both are types of sores you get on your feet. And so you can get a sense of how that works. Also on word connections, this is another one of my favorites for literature. It's called a connection table. And so you have a story and the gist of what the story's about. And then you have terms from the story and the gist or definition of what those terms mean. And then how the term was actually used in the story. And what's a personal experience related to that term. So for an example, let's say we're doing the Christmas Carol, which is basically how it's about how visions of past, present, and future change a selfish man. And so one of the terms is affable, and the gist is friendly or genial. And it's used to describe Mrs. Cratchit, Tiny Tim's mom. That's how it was used in the story. Personal connection, my brother David is really affable, so everybody loves him. Okay, so if we look at this, it looks pretty good because you can see how the term is being used in the story and also a personal connection to it. The only concern I've got about this one is the word genial. Now, if students know what genial means, then it'll work as part of the definition of affable. But if not, we shouldn't use that term in the definition. So other terms from the Christmas Carol might be destitute, and loathe, etc. Another term from word connections tool is called personal connections. And it looks similar to one you've seen already, but the prompts are a little bit different. So all the terms are related to this topic. What are the words, their definition, and a personal connection? What's it make you think of? Real world connections is really kind of drilling down on a word and how that world connects to the real world in some way. And so there's a mnemonic device called REAL, and so what we're going to do is reveal the key features, evaluate its value to our world, analyze reactions, how people react to that word, and then list background knowledge and experiences. So under reveal key features, we've got the topic or the word, and what's the gist of what it means, like the main idea behind it, main idea of the definition. And the essential features are key elements of the definition that are very specific. And so evaluate, let's just take a look at how that looks. So let's say we're doing Huck Finn, and the word is condescend. And that's to basically make someone feel inferior or humiliated by the way you speak or treat them. And so some key details or features is Huck's viewed black people as inferior to himself. The way Huck treated Jim was condescending, and Huck liked Jim, yet was clueless about how condescending he was toward him. So the next step of REAL is to evaluate its value to our world. And so we're going to look at this word condescend and make some judgments about whether this is something that should be part of today's world and or should not be part of today's world. And so obviously condescending is not such a great thing, so our world would be better off if people didn't condescend. And so we'd give some reasoning behind the choice. Like everybody should be treated with respect. Condescending treatment of an individual hurts everyone, including the person doing it. Okay. Then what we're going to do is the A step in REAL, which is analyze reactions. And these are either ways people cause this to occur more or ways people prevent the topic from occurring, or both. And so I'm going to click on ways people prevent the topic from occurring, and then I have to give some reasons behind it. So zero tolerance for racist or sexist remarks. It just won't tolerate it. List background knowledge or experiences related to this topic. Some groups of students think they're better than everybody else, so they're acting condescending toward others. So you can get a sense of how we're going way beyond what's just the definition of condescend, but thinking about it in terms of making various real-world connections from that word to the world students live in today. Features analysis is another one that's really cool. If you click on that, it will bring up this page. And so I'm going to bring this one up. And basically what you have is various terms you're looking at. And these are elements to definitions or features of those terms. So for example, in this case, we'll do for characters. And so these are various characters from Huck Finn. And then we have personality characteristics. And so what we're going to do is take each character and then code them in terms of whether they have these characteristics or not. And the code we're going to use is Y means yes, they have the feature. N means no, they don't have that feature. Or S means sometimes they do it and sometimes not. So yes is going to be an always, no, never. S is sometimes. So under kind-hearted, well, Huck is sometimes kind-hearted, but not always. He's sometimes condescending. He's sometimes dishonest. He's always loyal. So that would be an A or a yes, okay? He's sometimes mischievous, sometimes oblivious to the needs of others. He's always pretentious. He's never contentious. He's always smart. Sometimes he's victimized, and sometimes he acts like a racist. And so you can see how we've taken that and coded the characteristics, and then as we go through each of these other characters, we can code them the same way. This is something students really like to do, and it causes them to use various higher order thinking skills, so you're thinking more about the character in different ways. Then what we can do is, after we've coded the character, then draw a conclusion or write a description of the character based on the features that you've selected here. Here's another example of it. Here what we've done is we've taken different types of literature or characteristics of literature, and then different types of literature, and coded these. And so, for example, fiction is a novel fiction, yes. Can a novel be nonfiction? Sometimes. Does it have characters? Yes. Does it have a setting and a plot? Yes. Is it in verse? Sometimes. In prose? Yes. Does it have a moral? Sometimes. Does it have a protagonist? Sometimes. Whereas a lyric is going to have a different set of characteristics. And so you can see then we've drawn conclusions about each of those types of literature. Scavenger hunts are also kind of fun way of dealing with vocabulary. And an example of that is this one. And so basically you have a list of terms, and then what students have to do is go find from text where that term appeared. And it can be from text, it can be from a TV show or a movie or others on the radio or whatever. The thing is that they're looking for where in their world this term appeared. And so it's a scavenger hunt. So different teams have different terms, and then they go search for how the term was used and in the context of how it was used. So for example, let's say we're studying Treasure Island and one of the words was stockade. Well, where that term appeared was in chapter 3, and the context was Jim's on the ship describing a pirate fort on Treasure Island. And so you have all these other terms. Now, some of these terms may appeared in the book itself, or they may appear in different contexts, in articles about pirates or TV shows about pirates, etc. So it's just where the term appeared and how, what was the context in which it was being used. This is similar. Like for the red pony, you have contemplative, disciplinarian, carrion, and saunter.